Hi there, friend. Thanks for stopping by. If you're new here, subscribe and share this video. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment with your city or country. I read and appreciate them all. Let's go. Carter lingered in the slim hallway between the kitchen and living room, watching in silence the woman who had been part of his life for the past 10 years. Miranda was on the phone, her tone light and professional, her eyes distant. One hand gripped her phone, the other busied itself organizing a stack of papers into a polished leather binder. She spoke of appointments, bookings, and flights. At first glance, it all sounded like typical work chatter. But the way she smiled during the conversation made something inside Carter tighten. When she ended the call with a cheerful, "Talk soon," there was no sign anything out of the ordinary had transpired. She turned to him with the same airy tone, casually mentioning she'd be heading out of town the next day. A work trip, she said, essential for her career, just 3 days long. Carter didn't respond immediately. He needed a second to process it. She hadn't brought up any travel recently. He asked where she was going, who would be accompanying her, and why she had waited until now to say anything. There was a flicker in her expression. For an instant, she looked unsure, but then the mask returned. Calm, controlled, too polished to be spontaneous. She said she was traveling with Jared, the director at her firm. Initially, she described it as a collaborative retreat, part of a strategic initiative. But when Carter questioned why Jared was the only one involved, her composure faltered. Then plainly, she admitted it. She and Jared had been getting close. This trip wasn't just business. It had personal significance as well. She called it networking, but her voice betrayed something deeper. No matter how she phrased it, the reality hung heavy in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. She was emotionally invested elsewhere. A dull, bruising ache filled Carter's chest, part disbelief, part shame, part heartbreak. Miranda, however, showed no remorse. Instead, she calmly poured herself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and continued as if they were discussing weekend errands. She described Jared with admiration, his drive, his energy, the way he made her feel alive again. Then came the criticisms, precise, pointed, and cruelly measured. She accused Carter of becoming stagnant, of letting routine take over, of fading into the background. She said he no longer surprised her, no longer showed up for their relationship. Her words didn't shout, they sliced. Each sentence felt rehearsed, like a monologue she'd practiced for weeks. She spoke of lost spark, of boredom, of emotional suffocation. This wasn't just a confession. It was the systematic dismantling of everything they had shared. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. Her delivery was steady, as though the decision had been made long before this moment. Carter listened in stillness, absorbing it all. Some part of him wanted to ask if this was really happening, if this was truly the same woman who once vowed to stay through everything. But something deeper, some core of dignity, kept him quiet. He looked at her, unmoving. No arguments. No justifications. No desperate pleas. What he felt wasn't anger. It was a vast, weary disappointment. Miranda turned away, took her binder, and climbed the stairs, saying she had to finish packing. That was that. No tearful goodbyes. No hesitation. No second glance. She moved with purpose. Alone in the quiet that followed, Carter felt something within him give way. He remained still as the truth settled in. The signs had been there. Missed calls, vague excuses, shifting priorities. He just hadn't wanted to believe them. But now, at last, he saw it clearly. He had been alone for longer than he'd allowed himself to admit. Only now did he have the clarity to accept it. It felt like emerging from a fog he hadn't known he was in. Whatever love had once existed had long since morphed into something else, something cold and clear. And with that new understanding came a resolve, not born of rage, but of quiet intention. This wasn't only an ending. It might be the beginning of something far more honest. Later that day, Miranda continued packing. She didn't revisit the conversation, didn't acknowledge the shift between them. She moved through the house like someone fulfilling a plan long in motion. Carter watched from a distance, his silence louder than any words. She laid out clothes, filed documents, rechecked her itinerary, made one final call. There was no explanation, no attempt to bridge the emotional chasm. She acted as though it were any other trip, though they both knew it wasn't. As evening fell, the silence deepened. Miranda reheated leftovers and ate alone at the counter. Carter remained apart, sipping water before quietly heading to the bedroom. The rest of the evening passed like two strangers occupying a space once filled with shared dreams. For the first time, the house felt unfamiliar, stripped of warmth, emptied of meaning. Miranda eventually retreated into the bathroom, tending to her hair and skin like someone preparing for a fresh start. When she returned, she slid into bed beside him. Carter, already lying still, pretended to sleep. She turned off the light. Minutes went by. Then her slow, steady breathing filled the room. He lay still for hours, sleepless and motionless, a dull pressure lodged in his chest, like a weight he couldn't shift. Sharing a bed with someone whose heart was already somewhere else felt like enduring a silent, drawn-out sentence with no visible marks. As the first light crept into the room, Miranda was up before the alarm could sound. She showered, dressed with methodical precision, like someone preparing for an interview rather than a departure. After checking over her things one final time, she hoisted her suitcase, paused only long enough to say, "Back Monday," and left the room without a glance. Carter remained seated at the edge of the bed, replying only with a faint nod. She exited like it was any other routine workday. No kiss, no backward look, no flicker of regret. Only the lingering absence of affection. He didn't shift, didn't breathe deeply, didn't react. Just sat in stillness as the sound of her car drifted farther down the street. Only once he was certain she had gone, did he rise. He walked straight to the study and powered up the computer. Though his hands trembled slightly, there was a steady clarity in his eyes. He typed with deliberate care into the search field. Private Investigator Clearwater FL. Dozens of listings appeared. He studied each one in silence, not out of curiosity but necessity. He needed competence, discretion, and trust. He navigated from site to site, poring over client reviews, credentials, and fee structures. Eventually, one agency caught his attention. He picked up the phone and called. A calm, no-nonsense voice answered on the other end. Carter didn't dramatize. He was factual. His wife had left town for a weekend with her company's director, and he needed tangible proof, photos, logs, anything that could confirm what she had half confessed. He provided full names, a hotel address, their flight information, and recent pictures. Then he filled in the background. The investigator listened carefully, asked pointed questions, took notes, and assured him he'd have a report within 48 hours. A local surveillance team would begin immediately, the voice assured him. After hanging up, Carter felt something shift inside him. Not relief, but the return of agency. He opened his inbox and composed an email to a longtime attorney. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending things cleanly, respectfully, and legally, with evidence in hand. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into a sharper, more focused pain, a kind of drive. He didn't want a fight. He wanted clarity. He intended to end the marriage with the same dignity it had once been built upon. The silence in the house no longer felt oppressive. For the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. He maintained appearances through the day, ate a quiet lunch, returned phone calls, responded to emails. But inwardly, everything had changed. He no longer saw himself as the wounded party. He felt awake. The unraveling hadn't started that morning. It had begun at the kitchen table when Miranda admitted her feelings had changed. But now, he was the one in control of the story's final chapter, and he was writing it with care. By late afternoon, The investigator got back to him. Miranda and Jared had checked into the hotel together, were sharing the same suite, had gone out to dinner side by side. Carter read the brief report. Then he locked his phone with a slow, steady motion. There were no tears, no eruption of emotion, just the solid certainty that he was doing what needed to be done. The end of their marriage hadn't come with her packed luggage. It had come long before. Now he had the confirmation. That night, for the first time in months, he left the bedroom door cracked open. The house, though quiet, no longer felt hollow. Something in the air had shifted. The sorrow remained, but it no longer controlled him. This was the cost of freedom, and with it came a sobering clarity. He deserved more. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Miranda had no idea what she was walking back into. At exactly the hour she said she'd return, Carter heard the car pull up outside. He stayed where he was, watching from the window. He knew the sound of her engine, the way her door slammed shut, the clack of her suitcase wheels on the pavement. She returned like nothing had changed, like she was coming back from an ordinary trip. There was no remorse in her stride, no shadow of guilt on her face. She had no clue what was waiting for her behind the front door. Carter had spent the last 3 days preparing meticulously. The evidence was in hand. He had reviewed every image, studied every line of the report, consulted his lawyer, gathered all necessary documents. He arranged them neatly in a black folder and placed it squarely at the center of the dining table. Impossible to miss. Miranda entered wearing the same coat she'd worn when she left. She called out a cheerful, "Hey!" expecting everything to be as it was. She looked at Carter, perhaps waiting for a casual remark or a question about her weekend. But he didn't say a word. His eyes stayed locked on the folder. Miranda stepped into the living room, her mind clouded and her movements uncertain. She let her suitcase drop beside the sofa and slowly approached the table. Her eyes landed on a folder, deliberately arranged in the center. With cautious hands, she opened it. A single glance was enough to unravel the truth. The photos inside were arranged in order, each marked with a date and time. She sifted through them, each image feeding the unease growing in her chest. Nestled between the sheets were completed divorce papers, already signed, legally binding. At the very end, a handwritten note appeared, Carter's unmistakable handwriting. She read in silence, her expression unraveling line by line. The controlled exterior she had kept intact started to fracture. When she finally lifted her head, Carter was there, standing wordlessly in the hallway. She opened her mouth, ready to speak, but he raised his hand. His tone was steady, unshaken. According to him, their marriage had ended the moment she crossed a line that couldn't be undone. He laid it out plainly. Actions have weight. And she would now bear hers. In a rush of confusion and disbelief, Miranda tried to explain. She insisted it wasn't what it seemed, said the situation was more complicated than he knew, that the trip meant little, and that Jared had never been more than a temporary distraction. But her words carried no strength, no honesty. Carter didn't waver. The trust, he said, was shattered beyond repair. The legal wheels were already turning. She was granted a few days to collect her belongings. Her lawyer could coordinate the rest. Still, she clung to hope, inching closer to him. But Carter stepped back. There was nothing left to resolve, he said. That chapter was over. That was the moment she collapsed. Tears ran freely down her face as she pleaded with him, asked how he could be so cold, accused him of cruelty. What cut deepest, though, was his calmness. Carter met her collapse with quiet resolve. He told her this wasn't punishment, it was self-respect. She hesitated, uncertain, and instinctively reached for her phone. She dialed, but didn't let it ring. Her self-assured mask had fallen. For the first time, she looked directionless. Nearly an hour later, she walked out, wheeling the same suitcase she had brought back from her trip. At the door, she paused, saying she'd return for the rest. Carter nodded, repeating that everything would be settled through the attorneys. She didn't argue. She got in her car, turned the ignition, and drove away, never glancing back. From the gate, Carter watched her leave until the car turned out of sight. He felt no satisfaction, no hate, only a hollow certainty. It was necessary. A sharp break meant to sever the infection before it consumed everything. Inside, he gathered the documents, placed them back in the folder, and locked it in a drawer. Then he exhaled, long and steady. The hardest part was behind him. He had held the line, without yelling, without losing composure, without surrendering his principles. He was clear on what needed to be done. The photos from the investigator weren't just damaging, they were undeniable. Everything had been recorded: dates, venues, timestamps. Miranda and Jared sharing luxury hotel rooms paid for by the company, indulging in expensive meals on the firm's dime, toasting each other obliviously while risking both their careers. Carter had documented every piece, a thorough, emotionless report, cross-referenced with precision. Then he attached the evidence to a plain, direct email addressed to the corporate board at the firm where both Miranda and Jared worked. There were no accusations, no dramatic claims, just facts and a single question. Is this behavior compatible with leadership? Within 2 days, both were summoned for an emergency board review. A formal inquiry began almost immediately. The charges were serious: unauthorized use of corporate assets for personal indulgences, masked as business activity. But the images shattered their defenses. The review committee made its decision swiftly. Jared was fired for ethical breaches. Miranda was dismissed as well, both cited for violating corporate policy and misusing company funds. Their professional lives imploded in a single morning. Later that day, Carter's phone rang. Miranda's name appeared on the screen. On the other end, her voice was frantic, seething. "You destroyed me! What did you do?" He stayed silent. She continued, voice rising. "You sent those pictures, didn't you? How could you?" That was when he finally spoke. His voice was cold, cutting, filled with the fury he had kept buried. "How could I? You lied to me, embarrassed me, and now you dare talk about betrayal?" He didn't give her a chance to respond. "Get out of my life, Miranda. Go live in your fantasy with your affair." He ended the call, his heart pounding, adrenaline flooding through him. All the pain he had held back for weeks had found its outlet, and he felt no guilt, not even a trace. About 30 minutes later, Miranda's phone rang again. This time, it was Jared. The charm in his voice was gone, replaced by bitterness and blame. "Your husband ruined everything. I'm out. They didn't even let me pack up." She tried to calm him, to reach out, to suggest they could weather it together, but his response was cruel and conclusive. "Together? We were never anything. You were convenient. Now you're dangerous. Stay away, or I'll drag you into court with me." The line went dead. Miranda stood still, silence pressing in on all sides. Everything had fallen apart: her career, her lover, her sense of control. What was left now was only the void. The most crushing blow of all was losing Carter, the one person who had stood unwaveringly by her side when everyone else had turned their backs. The humiliation cut deep, and for the first time, she had no one left to catch her when she fell. It had been 4 long years since Miranda walked out of Carter's home for the last time, unaware that her world would slowly and thoroughly come undone. Every attempt to start over was stalked by the scandal, an ever-present specter she couldn't shake. She scraped through life with odd jobs, moving from town to town, always hoping to outrun the accusing looks that seemed to follow her. Faces that silently screamed, "We know." Jared had vanished without a trace, no goodbyes, no explanations. Gossip buzzed in his wake. Some said he'd fled the country, others murmured about a breakdown. Miranda never corrected them. She simply endured, dwelling in the wreckage she'd created, clinging to whatever fragments remained after her choices had turned everything to ash. Then, On an otherwise unremarkable afternoon, she exited a grocery store in the heart of downtown when laughter, bright and contagious, echoed across the street. She turned instinctively, and then her breath caught. Carter. But not the Carter she remembered. He was laughing, bent over with joy, lifting a small child, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, onto his shoulders. The little girl beamed, her laughter unfiltered and radiant. With ease and strength, he held her high and said with a wide grin, "Hold on tight, Missy. Daddy's your airplane." Miranda stood motionless, her heart hammering against her ribs, the world around her blurring. She wanted to run, escape the scene, but her body refused. A moment later, a woman joined them. Young, composed, her hair neatly tied back. She placed a gentle hand on Carter's arm, and he looked at her with warmth. Then she kissed him, softly, familiarly. The child leaned forward, wrapping her arms around both adults, laughing like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. It was a simple, fleeting moment, but it pierced something deep within Miranda. They were a family, complete. And only then did she fully comprehend the depth of what she had once had, and lost. 2 days went by, but the image lingered, refusing to fade. It haunted her like a memory etched in permanence. Every detail, the girl's laughter, Carter's joyful eyes, the effortless affection, replayed in her mind like a song stuck on repeat. That night, in the shadowy silence of the apartment she barely lived in, Miranda sat at the edge of her bed, a restless ache twisting inside her. She opened her contacts. His number was still there. She didn't allow herself to think. Thinking hurt too much. Her finger trembled, then tapped call. Her hands were shaking. When he answered, his voice was the same, but time had changed its weight, familiar, yet distant. She hesitated, then said softly, "Carter, it's me." The silence that followed stretched longer than she anticipated. When he finally spoke, his voice was cool. "What are you calling for?" She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "I saw you. At the store, with the little girl. Is she yours?" "She is," he replied. "Ella, she changed everything." Miranda's voice wavered. "And the woman, your wife?" "That's Laura," he answered. "She showed me that love isn't something that disappears, that I could rebuild, even when it felt like everything was gone. She found me when I had nothing left to give." Miranda closed her eyes, her voice no louder than a breath. I needed to tell you I'm sorry, for all of it, for what I did to you. I destroyed the best part of my life." Again, silence. But this time, Carter let out a long, slow breath before he spoke. "You shattered me, Miranda. I was in a place so dark, I didn't think I'd ever get out. But I did. I took what you left behind and made something better." His words hit her like a wave she'd tried to outrun for too long. "And even though it almost ruined me," he continued, "I'm grateful. Because that collapse, it set me free." She cried then, silently, as if her tears could erase the damage. "Do you forgive me?" A pause. Then, "I do. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back. It's not a doorway you step through. It's a conclusion. A quiet goodbye." She tried to respond, but he gently interrupted her. "Take care of yourself, Miranda. You have to, because people who don't learn from pain end up living it all over again." And just like that, he ended the call. She stared at the screen, stunned, as if his words had physically struck her. But she didn't scream. She didn't throw the phone. She just sat still, silent, transformed. And for the first time, she understood what Carter had been trying to show her all those years ago. Losing him hadn't been a punishment. It had been the consequence of everything she had failed to hold on to. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you liked this story, Check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.